by political journalist Zoe Grunwald and Sacha O'Sullivan, host of Westminster Insider at Politico Europe. Welcome, both of you. Good to see you. So, Sacha, take us to the front of the Sunday Express to kick off with, because their headline focuses on what they call Keir Starmer's flagship EU trade deal, which I wasn't aware they had one at the moment, but they're talking about some concerns around.
I think if the Sunday Express have got hold of Keir Starmer's flagship EU trade deal, that's probably a bigger scoop than the research put out by the Food and Drink Federation, which is what they've splashed with, which is basically saying that if we were to have a closer relationship with the EU, which meant that we had more food and drink being kind of traded with European countries, we would have to comply with EU regulations. And the Food and Drink Federation has found more than 400 UK regulations which would have to change. They do say, you know, this is going to cost us money in the short term, but in the long term, it will save us money. And the Food and Drink Federation kind of put out stats all the time saying that Brexit has cost them kind of £170 million just in paperwork. And overall, reduced food exports have cost the UK economy £3.1 billion. So there are very much two sides to this story, and we've got one of them on the front page.
Well, yes, and perhaps the Sunday Express raising some of the issues that might come up, given that this conversation appears to have started again, that various either leadership candidates or the government themselves have talked about closer relations with the EU or even reversing Brexit.
Yeah, that's right. Wes Streeting obviously has said he wants to see the UK rejoining the EU. I think Sacha makes a really good point, which is that it kind of feels like the Brexit refrain is getting a little bit desperate here. Ultimately, yes, of course, any new regulation will probably cost people money, but in the long term, not only will it save businesses money, we also have to look at the damage that is being done at the minute by not being a part of the EU. So, you know, new regulations that were created that we have to adhere to and what that costs suppliers, trading friction, you know, the end of subsidies, which, of course, Brexit brought in. So it's very easy to say that these things are going to cost money, but if you're looking long term, a lot of economists would say, actually, we were better off in the EU and we would be better off again. A bit of short-term pain to rejoin or get closer or to align would be offset quite quickly, actually, by the long-term economic benefits. And that's why you get the Labour leadership contenders now trying to appeal to the Labour base, saying, we see the economic benefits, we want to rejoin the EU. The problem for Keir Starmer and for other parties is it's still seen as a politically toxic issue because, of course, everyone remembers the referendum. Everyone remembers all the conversations that came alongside it. It wasn't just to do with the economy, it was to do with sovereignty, it was to do with identity, and reopening that is a big can of worms. But if you are trying to be the new Labour leader and all you have to do is bring your backbenchers on side and voters and Labour members, this is going to be very appealing.
Yeah, and people who voted Brexit, as you say, didn't do it just for one reason, and they may also argue that they think that the economy is better being separated from the EU.
Yeah.
But anyway, before we kind of rehash all those arguments from all those years ago, let's move on to the front page of the Sunday Mirror. And again, this is a subject that we've been talking a lot about in the last few weeks, and it feels like it's gaining momentum, this sense that some kind of social media ban or some kind of controls on children having access to it might be introduced quite soon.
Yes, of course, there's a consultation ongoing at the heart of government to look into following countries like Australia or Spain, other countries that have already taken action to ban or restrict social media for under 16s. The Tech Secretary, Liz Kendall, not trying to preempt the results of the consultation or any policy, but she has said that a ban on youngsters using things like Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram is definitely on the table. She also said that 9 out of 10 parents who responded to the online safety consultation have called for Australian-style age limits to stop kids from using the apps. She said something drastic has to happen to provide the kind of support that parents want. So she's definitely laying the groundwork for action from the government on this. And we know that there has been action going on in the Lords, trying to table amendments to the schools bill to try and force the government to put a ban on social media. There's a lot of cross-party support for this. Parents definitely have a lot of concerns, but there are still issues, and we're seeing this in Australia at the minute, of kids just bypassing the regulation, just finding ways onto the platforms anyway. So, you know, it isn't a silver bullet. You know, it isn't just countries that have done it have faced their own difficulties. But I think we're definitely going to see some movement on this in a few weeks because there's been so much public pressure being put on the government.
Yeah, and clearly there is a belief that something has to be done. As Zoe was hinting there, that it's not clear yet from the Australian experience how effective a ban would be. But if nothing else, it would be popular if the government did make a move, it would seem.
It would definitely be popular, and I think it goes to the frustration that parents have that they just don't know how to deal with how much time their kids spend on social media. And even if a ban is easily bypassed, it's better than nothing, basically, because it's a way of the government saying, we understand how challenging this is for you. I do think the Australian example, I mean, I'm from Australia, so I find it very interesting. A lot of teenagers they either weren't kicked off when the ban first came in or immediately were able to get back on. My sister is a high school teacher in regional Australia, and she was saying, look, the teenagers who are on it, are already on social media, won't really be affected by the ban, but what it can do is the kind of 10-year-olds who aren't quite on Instagram or TikTok, like it delays the point at which they start getting on it. So it's not going to help a 16-year-old who's addicted to TikTok necessarily, but it will potentially help a younger generation. So I think looking at those findings as it kind of happens in Australia will be really important for how we implement it here in the UK if we do.
Yeah, and also just when it's the law, it does make it easier for parents to say, look, it's not just me, it's, you know, this is the law.
Do you want to go to prison? Which is a very successful thing to say to kids, I think, actually.
Not necessarily. But I think that sense of parents having some guardrails and some ground rules and setting a kind of the atmosphere around it for kids so they kind of understand some of the dangers.
I think that's absolutely true. I think it definitely empowers parents, as you say, to back up their parenting. I think the elephant in the room, though, of course, is that the responsibility here lies with tech companies. You know, they very much have the duty of care. They design the platforms that kids use, and there is increasing evidence that they are making them addictive because kids are a very kind of malleable audience to have. You can sell them things, you can prey on their insecurity. Well. Of course it does, but, you know, kids are much more vulnerable in many ways. And I think one of the reasons why a ban you kind of have to put a ban on the table is because without saying to these tech companies, we could take this entire audience away from you, I think we kind of lose our bargaining position. I think the government has to be as strong as it can be with tech companies, and saying we're prepared to remove these, these people from you, I think is probably the best way to get through to what is fundamentally the bottom line of tech companies.
Yeah, and there's so many different arguments around this, isn't it? Whether more should be done within education to kind of teach children how to cope with it as well. But let's move on for now. Sasha, Sunday Telegraph has a story. We talked about their main story about benefit checks, but Kemi Badenoch is also putting a message out about how the party should be in future and what Tory MPs who they should be and how they should work.
Yeah, so Kemi Badenoch's trying to bring in MPs who are not your kind of typical career politician who have maybe worked for a think tank and then become an advisor and then gone on to become an MP. She wants people who are teachers, engineers, electricians and builders. And she's basically saying to them, if you do come in and do this job, you don't have to be what she calls a glorified social worker. Now, I think a lot of MPs will look at that and think, I'm not a glorified social worker. And actually, that might be a bit rude to social workers. Because the casework and actually looking after your constituents is part of the job. And also, like, there's not a hell of a lot of money for staff and constituency officers. And you can't palm this off to a kind of 20-something-year-old. You are elected to both make speeches in Parliament and to look after the people that you represent. That is the job of an MP, unfortunately.
Yeah, what do you think about this? Because obviously she has a vision of how she wants the party to work, but presumably it's... Not everybody wants to be an MP, and at the moment, given that MPs get a lot of grief as well, some people might be quite resistant. Do you think kind of saying, I only want this kind of person, not that kind of person, might be an issue?
I think she touches on some interesting things in here, which is that maybe Parliament isn't very representative and diverse. We probably need people with more lived experience in there. That's absolutely true. I think she's also, she makes a fair point about some of politics becoming quite performative. I do think that's a bit hypocritical from Kemi Badenoch. I mean, she talks about people giving speeches just for a few likes on social media. Politics has become a stage. I mean, I think there's a lot... I think she'd be hard-pressed to say that she's not... she isn't guilty of a little bit of social media schmoozing. Okay. But yes, I think absolutely it's... but I think a lot of her comments in there are actually quite offensive and misguided.
We're out of time. Thank you both so much this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?